So allow me to take you on another journey. Last Halloween, I made a video about everything Lavender Town, the spookiest place in all of Kanto, where the residents deal with death, grief, abuse, sadness, and literal ghost possession. It was meant to be a one-off video idea as my Halloween special, but I had a lot of fun researching and making it. So then in June of 2024, I made another one all about Cinnabar Island, a peculiar island in the southwest with a resurrection lab and a burned down mansion that has been overrun with fire and poison type Pokemon while burglars and scientists skulk around. You also discover diary entries about an escaped Mewtwo's vicious tendencies. Do check out those videos as well, as I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in those places. And I haven't verbally mentioned this in a while, but also check out my Patreon if you get the impulse. Even the $1 tier will get you a super cool Paraspectre sticker to put on your water bottle or lawnmower or whatever. I haven't really been promoting it much lately, but yeah, the option is there if you want to check it out and support the channel financially. Completely up to you. Patreon.com/Paraspectre. Anyway, I think it's high time that I put on my name tag and be your tour guide once more for another place of interest in the Kanto region. I'm not only going to talk about Kanto for these videos, but I wanted to cover some of the more interesting places there to me first, before I think about moving on. So after you complete your early game tasks of absolutely wrecking Brock, Misty, and Lieutenant Surge's gym teams, you acquire the HM for Cut, and you can now bypass those extremely thin trees that have been blocking your path at various points. Turning your body to the side to easily walk right by them is practically suicide. So thankfully, you were able to rub an old man's back on a cruise ship for a while instead, as he thanks you with the ability to yeet those trees right out of the ground. This is weird, right? This is a weird game sometimes. But heading east of Cerulean City, you encounter a long, winding path on Route 9 that is littered with a variety of trainers here. Finally, at the very end, is Route 10. At first, Route 10 seems extremely small, especially compared to the route you just trekked through. There's a small patch of grass that contains some boring Spearow that you've likely seen numerous times, but also, if you're playing the blue version, you'll encounter the greatest Pokemon of all time, Sandshrew. You'll find some lame Ekans in the red version instead of Sandshrew, but there's no reason to play the red version because of this. But it is in this patch of grass where you will also encounter a brand new Pokemon, the electric-type ball Pokemon, Voltorb. Well, that's kinda cool. It looks just like a Pokeball, just with some angry eyes, and it's actually a Pokemon. But aside from this patch of grass, all that's here is some water, a Pokemon Center, some trees to cut for basically no reason, one junior trainer, and the entrance to the rock tunnel. Well, that was a pretty uneventful route, I gotta say. Time to make your way through the grueling, pitch-black rock tunnel before you reach Lavender Town, and well, we all know what happens there. So you continue on with your quest, probably putting absolutely no further thought into Route 10 in any way. Why would you? It's off on its own to the east and just had some grass and a Pokemon Center. So by the time you reach Fuchsia City and explore the Safari Zone, you will acquire the HM for Surf, which is essential to beat the game. You can now ride on certain Pokemon to traverse bodies of water. But if, and I mean if, you just so happen to remember Route 10 of all places, there was one tiny opening above that plain old patch of grass that led to some water. You could do some fishing here if you want and snag yourself a super cool Poliwhirl. But hey, what if you did some surfing here too? Does it lead anywhere? So you hop on your trusty water friend and follow along this very narrow path heading south. Why is there an isolated building in a very inconvenient spot on the map? What is this place, and why is there one Pokemon trainer standing in front of it? So once you defeat this crazy looking Pokemaniac's level 30 Rhyhorn and Lickitung, you can enter the building. This here is the Kanto Power Plant. But kinda like with the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island, this place is looking a little unkempt. It's full of maze-like rooms and crumbling debris everywhere, and creepily enough, nobody in sight. Supposedly this power plant was abandoned sometime before the events of Red, Green, and Blue, and now just sits on its own, completely inaccessible unless you just so happen to follow a narrow water path. What I love about some of these places in Kanto is that they really aren't glamorized. Just like in a real town or city, there will be buildings that have been abandoned or condemned, And this little Game Boy game has two pretty notable places like this of the power plant and the mansion. This is no longer a functional power plant, but there have been no plans to demolish it. It just kinda remains hidden off of a nothing route being overrun by Pokemon. Maybe 20 years ago or so, my friends and I used to like going to this abandoned house that was maybe a half-hour drive from where I lived. To get there, you had to park at a state park and walk down this long grassy path on a fairly narrow peninsula. At the end, there was just this abandoned, decrepit-looking house with nothing else around it but overgrown grass, plants, trees, and water. No roads leading to it or anything. It was strange. It was so inconvenient to get there, but for some reason, a house was built there at some point and then completely abandoned. So we would go there in the dark, bringing different friends to check it out, and even though we wouldn't actually do anything but walk around inside with our flashlights, there was something intriguing and creepy about it, and it was just kind of fun to go there, especially for us teenagers. The Kanto Power Plant kind of reminds me of this house. There are no trainers here, just wild Pokemon and a ton of items around. And that weird Pokemaniac loitering outside with his licky tongue.
Oh no! Oh no!
In the red and blue versions, there are a total of 15 items here. Wowie zowie. An absolute potluck of fortune. Why are there so many items here? Ah well, I guess it's time to start loading up the old knapsack and whoa, what's this? That's not an item at all. That's right, you've just been bamboozled.
We have been hoodwinked, bamboozled.
There are actually only 7 real items here and 2 of them are hidden. So only 5 of these Pokeball symbols are legit and the other 8 are actually Pokemon. If you did explore that patch of grass on Route 10 earlier in the game, finding wild Voltorb is not a new thing, but now they are straight up posing as items here in order to trick you. This is also what is known as a Mimic, a type of creature made popular in Dungeons & Dragons and other RPGs. Mimics will pose as items or treasure chests to lure in unsuspecting travelers to attack them. My first time encountering something like this was actually in Super Mario RPG, in which jumping into some item boxes will result in a fairly difficult fight against what you thought was going to be something to add to your inventory. So Pokemon also adapted this concept inside the power plant here. Voltorb is the pure electric type ball Pokemon that, well, looks strikingly similar to a Pokeball. It has the exact same half red, half white coloring, but also an angry looking face. The original Pokédex says they are usually found in power plants. Well, yeah. Easily mistaken for a Pokeball, they have zapped many people. Voltorb are only found in these 2 places in the original games, the power plant and Route 10. Easily its best stat is speed, with attack being its worst. And that is a detriment to Voltorb in the original games because, weirdly enough, it doesn't naturally learn any electric moves. It can only learn 7 moves by level, 6 of them normal type, and 2 of those are Self-Destruct and Explosion, 2 strong moves that instantly knock out Voltorb. You can teach it the TMs of Thunderbolt, Thunder, and Thunder Wave, so it's certainly possible to actually have it attack with electric moves, but Voltorb on its own is a strange one. It exists to pretend to be a Pokeball and then absolutely blows itself up. I actually really like Voltorb though. As well as them posing as the 6 fake items, Voltorb are also found as wild encounters here 35% of the time at levels 21 or 23. But of course, it does evolve at level 30 into Electrode. Like with Voltorb, 2 of the items found here are Electrode mimicking as them. Electrode is the pure electric type ball Pokemon that is larger than a Voltorb, has its colors flipped, so its eyes are on the white side, and now has a more smug look to it as well as a mouth, something Voltorb doesn't have. The original Pokédex says, it stores electric energy under very high pressure. It often explodes with little or no provocation. Electrode is the single fastest Pokemon of the original 151, just barely above Jolteon, Aerodactyl, and Mewtwo. Me personally, I don't like Electrode nearly as much as Voltorb. I prefer Voltorb's intimidating angry face over Electrode looking like it's about to try and sell me a car or something, I don't know. I would even go as far as saying I don't think Voltorb should have even had an evolution. Voltorb could have been the mimic Pokemon, and that's it. But now we have 2, with its evolution just turning the ball upside down and giving it a different face. But yeah, Electrode was originally the king of speed, so there's certainly some merit to you using one on your team as opposed to Voltorb. There's no reason to not evolve one if you plan on using it, unless you're doing some wacky Voltorb only challenge or something, but that would be ludicrous. But interestingly enough, these two fake items Electrode is posing as are the only Electrode you can get in the game until the post-game area of the Cerulean Cave, or the one in-game trade on Cinnabar Island. Obviously, you can catch one of the infinite Voltorb here and evolve it, but it can prove to be difficult to catch one of these two Electrode, since they have such high speed and can explode right in your face before you can whittle down its health. Once a wild one self-destructs, it's gone forever. 25% of the time, you'll also encounter another returning Pokemon, the mascot of the entire franchise. In Red, Green, and Blue, Pikachu are only found in Viridian Forest as pretty rare encounters, or here in the Power Plant. If you didn't know Pikachu were found in Viridian Forest, you could very easily go through it and never see one. But they're much easier to find here. Everybody knows what a Pikachu is, but it is the pure electric type mouse Pokemon. The original Pokédex entry says, when several of these Pokemon gather, their electricity could build and cause lightning storms. Gameplay-wise, Pikachu are known for being fast, but have pretty low defense and HP. And I also think this is the perfect place to find them. Electric mice running around a run-down power plant. Yeah, that just seems right. If the entire population of the world didn't know what a Pikachu was, I feel like it would have been a good idea to have this be the only place in the game to get one. But even still, it's only here or Viridian Forest. I like that they had it be semi-rare to find one in the original games. And of course, Pikachu evolves into Raichu when exposed to a Thunderstone. Raichu are actually found here as well, but only in the blue version, and only with a 5% encounter rate at levels 33 or 36. Raichu is also the pure electric type mouse Pokemon who is larger than Pikachu with a much longer tail, twisty ears, and a more orange color. The original Pokédex says, its long tail serves as a ground to protect itself from its own high voltage power. While still having pretty low defense, Raichu is quite fast with pretty strong attack and special. I always liked Raichu enough, but it's not a favorite of mine or anything. I like the idea of having it be a rare encounter here too, although with Pikachu being pretty common and able to evolve in seconds if you have a Thunderstone, getting a Raichu from here could still only take a matter of minutes. Another encounter that you'll see 25% of the time is the pure electric type magnet Pokemon Magnemite, at least pure electric in Gen 1. In the original games, this is the only place to get a Magnemite. Magnemite is simply a light gray sphere with one eye, a few screws, and two magnets on its sides. Its original Pokédex entry says, it uses anti-gravity to stay suspended. It appears without warning and uses Thunder Wave and similar moves. Interesting, I never thought of Thunder Wave being its main move, but yeah, I guess. Unlike most electric types, speed is not its best stat. In fact, it has pretty low speed, but special is its best stat. Its worst is easily HP, with attack not far behind. I do quite like Magnemite. It's a simple design, but it's a cool idea to have this Cyclops magnet thing hovering around. I always think of its animation in the Stadium games. Magnemite are found here at levels 21 or 23, and it evolves into Magneton at level 30. And yes, 10% of the time you'll also encounter a Magneton, the pure electric type magnet Pokemon. Magneton is literally just 3 Magnemite magnetized together in a circular shape. Of those designs where the evolution is just adding more of the same thing, I think Magneton works the best. It would make sense for this magnetic pole to attract more Magnemite, and yeah, I actually like it. It's much better than Dugtrio in my opinion, which is basically the same concept. Dugtrio is lazy, Magneton is friend. The original Pokédex says, it is formed by several Magnemites linked together. They frequently appear when sunspots flare up. Magneton is basically just a better Magnemite in every way, with pretty high special and fairly decent defense and speed. So as I just mentioned, Raichu is only found here in the blue version, but there is actually an equally rare encounter here but as a red version exclusive. 5% of the time, this is where you'll find Electabuzz, as its only location in the original games. It's a rare encounter in a pretty hidden and out-of-the-way building, and only on the red version, so I bet back in the day, coming across an Electabuzz was probably pretty exciting. Electabuzz is the pure electric Pokemon, that's what it says. That's sort of tiger-like in appearance with the black lightning bolt style stripes over yellow. The original Pokédex says, they are normally found near power plants. Yep, and they can wander away and cause major blackouts in cities. I like Electabuzz though. It's usually kinda paired with Magmar in that they're both pure type rare encounters in late game areas, each exclusive to a game. Both were given baby forms of Magby and Elekid in Gen 2, and were both given evolved forms of Magmortar and Electivire in Gen 4. Electabuzz has high speed and decently high special and attack, so it's pretty good to have on your team too. And that's it for the wild encounters here. So you can keep on navigating your way through this maze, collecting items, fighting, catching, or dodging all of the wild, pure electric types here, and that's all well and good. But is there anything else you can do here? What is at the very end of this maze? But as you approach the northwest corner, you'll see a bird just sitting there. This here is the only other encounter in the building, the legendary electric flying type electric Pokemon, Zapdos. Zapdos is the second of the 3 legendary birds along with Articuno and Moltres. I kinda touched on this in the Cinnabar Island video, but the lab did mention these legends in a note. This is the only place in the entire game where you can find Zapdos, and there is only one. If you can't catch it or you knock it out, there is no going back and it's gone forever. And it's level 50, so you better have some Pokemon who can hold their own against it. It is said that Zapdos is the representation of summer, while Articuno is winter and Moltres is spring. It has a pretty awesome design of the spiky yellow and black pointed wings and electric spikes on its head and tail, along with a long, narrow beak. Zapdos is absolutely one of my favorite legendary types of all time. It's just awesome. The Pokédex says, it's a legendary bird Pokemon that is said to appear from clouds while dropping enormous lightning bolts. Zapdos is one of the strongest Pokemon in the original games, with it being tied for the 4th best special, only behind Mewtwo, Alakazam, and Gengar. It has very high speed as well as great HP and attack, with defense being its worst stat. Each of the legendary birds has their own nesting place, so it's just a cool find if you happened upon this abandoned power plant and discovered the legendary Zapdos just sitting there at the end. It makes it feel like it's the end boss or the leader of the electric types here. There's some fun lore to be had with it. As far as this place goes in other games, wild encounters here are pretty different in the yellow version. Since the yellow version is the special Pikachu edition, you aren't meant to find Pikachu in the wild in that game at all. You get the one as your starter, and that's it. It refuses to evolve in the game, so you'd have to trade in order to get a Raichu. So obviously, Pikachu and Raichu are omitted from the power plant. Electabuzz is also missing here. The most common encounters here are Magnemite, Magneton, and Voltorb, with the weird addition of Grimer and Muck here as well, acting as pretty rare encounters at 15 and 5% of the time. I kinda liked that the power plant was strictly electric types and nothing else, but for some reason they added Grimer and Muck here, 2 pure poison types. I guess it kinda works in the sense that they're in a rundown building just like the Pokemon Mansion, but I don't know. I already talked about Grimer and Muck in that video too. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, it's back to being close to the red and blue encounters. Magnemite and Voltorb are the most common here at 30%, Pikachu are found 25% of the time, and then Magneton has a different rate depending on the version you're playing. It's more common in Leaf Green at 15%, but that's because Electabuzz is exclusive to Fire Red here. Magneton only has a 10% rate to make up for Electabuzz's 5%. So that means no wild Raichu encounters, and definitely no Grimer or Muck. Another slight change here is that you'll only find the 2 Electrode posing as items here, no Voltorb. Again, I don't think I like this, but that's just a personal preference. To me, Voltorb is a better Mimic Pokemon than Electrode. Also, if you run from Zapdos here, it will respawn, so there's a nice little break there. But then this place gets pretty wacky in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Because these games are loosely meant to be remakes of the yellow version specifically, there are no wild Pikachu or Raichu here in either version. Instead, you get Grimer and Muck in Let's Go Pikachu, and Coughing and Wheezing in Let's Go Eevee. So now it's even more like a secondary Pokemon Mansion. I don't know why I liked them being there, but not at the rundown power plant. Either way, this is what we get. Also here are Magnemite and Magneton at 23 and 5% respectively, Voltorb and Electrode with the same rate, and then Electabuzz at an all-time high of 14%, and in both games. And this time, 4 of the items are Electrode posing as them, and Zapdos will only respawn once you enter the Hall of Fame. Also, here are 2 trainers this time too, of a coach trainer having Omastar, Kabutops, and Aerodactyl, and the game's Voltorb Master Trainer, where you fight a level 70 Voltorb. But also, like with the other places I've talked about, the Gen 2 games of Gold, Silver, and Crystal do take place 3 years after Red and Blue, and you can most certainly visit Kanto and the Power Plant here. The Power Plant this time is actually up and running once again. Well, that's nice. It's also significantly smaller and is no longer populated by wild Pokemon. Instead, you can find some electric types outside of Voltorb and Electabuzz. No more Pikachu or Magnemite in sight. But this time, the Power Plant is actually important to your exploration of Kanto. You have to restore power to the Magnet Train at the Power Plant in order to travel between Kanto and Johto. And apparently, a dastardly thief has stolen an important piece in order for the Power Plant's generator to be functional. Oh no! Once you track down the thief and retrieve the machine part from the Cerulean Gym, you can make the Power Plant functional again and get the TM for Zap Cannon. That's pretty much the gist of the Power Plant in Gen 2. It's part of the post-game story, and you can get a new electric move. It pretty much had the opposite outcome of the Pokemon Mansion, in that it went from being abandoned to fully functional, while the mansion went from being abandoned to completely wiped out by a volcano. Also, in the Crystal version, you can make a trade here of Dugtrio for Magneton, and I absolutely approve of this trade. And well, that's pretty much it for the Power Plant in the games. As far as it appearing in the anime, the main series sort of had a variation of it in the 30th episode, Sparks Fly for Magnemite. In the episode, the gang arrives at a made-up place called Gringy City, where Pikachu suddenly falls ill. The Pokemon Center tells Ash that Pikachu simply has a cold. But this city does have a hydroelectric power plant that recently had its water flow blocked by a group of Grimer, and thus the power goes out. Entering the Dark Power Plant, they are greeted by a Magnemite who seems interested in Pikachu. They are soon attacked by some Grimer and the leader Muck, but are saved by Magnemite and Magneton, which restores power to the power plant. This is also where Ash catches the Muck. A power plant worker explains that Pikachu had built up so much electricity that it became magnetized, thus attracting the Magnemite. So it's not exactly the same power plant, but I think it's close enough. The main games don't have a Gringy City, but it does take place in Kanto and heavily features Magnemite and Magneton. And also Grimer and Muck, so I guess I can forgive the yellow version inserting them there. In fact, since the yellow version tries to be more of an adaptation of the anime, Grimer and Muck were apparently included in the power plant because of this episode, so fine, I'm okay with it now. In the File 4 Charizard episode of Pokemon Origins, the power plant is very briefly shown of Red catching Zapdos here after fighting it with Tauros. That's really it. It's brushed over here just like the mansion was in that episode. And then in a much more recent episode of Pokemon Journeys the series, the power plant returns in the episode A Crackling Raid Battle, where Ash and Go realize Zapdos may be causing blackouts and dark thunderclouds. Upon reaching the power plant, they find Team Rocket as well as Zapdos absorbing power from the power plant. Ash, Go, Jesse, and James join forces to try and fight Zapdos, but it escapes to the roof. Go follows it and tries to catch it a couple times, but Zapdos eventually escapes. I haven't personally watched any Pokemon Journeys, but it seems pretty awesome to have an episode heavily focused on Zapdos and the power plant. Much better than that Cliff Notes version from Origins. And yes, I've mentioned this in both of the other episodes, but I know next to nothing about the manga, but the power plant is featured in 4 chapters, 3 from Pokemon Adventures. The existence of the power plant here is an incomplete project. The construction has caused industrial waste, which has done ecological damage to the surrounding Pokemon and plant life. So yet again, a justification for Grimer, Muck, Coughing, and Wheezing to be here in certain games. I stand corrected, okay? In Holy Moltres of the Red, Green, and Blue arc, Lieutenant Surge is a commander for Team Rocket, and he tells Giovanni that he caught Zapdos at the power plant. In Lapras Lazuli of the Yellow arc, there have been ghosts appearing at the abandoned power plant, which is where ghost leader Agatha of the Elite Four is hanging around near a Magnemite. And finally, in Regain the Deserted Power Plant chapter of Pokemon Pocket Monsters, the power plant is destroyed by Red's Clefairy. So it doesn't really get heavily featured in these issues or in the anime, but it still has a presence. And that's not even all though, there are actually 2 cards in the TCG named after the Kanto Power Plant. Aquapolis has a version of a stadium card where it remains in play. It allows any player to discard an energy in their hand to replace it with one from the discard pile. Kind of a cool little bonus, as anybody can utilize it. Unbroken Bonds and Cosmic Eclipse also have a version of the Power Plant, also as a stadium card. It negates all abilities of Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX in play, as long as it is in play. I kind of expected at least one of these to give some sort of bonus to electric Pokemon, but alas, that is not the case. I think the Aquapolis one is more relevant to the Power Plant itself, as it does deal with recycling energy. Stopping GX or EX abilities could really be from any card. And the last thing to mention, although it's not really the same thing, is the tunnel area from Pokemon Snap. The tunnel has some Power Plant imagery, and this is where you can find Pikachu, Magnemite, Magneton, Electabuzz, Electrode, and even Zapdos, so it's definitely worth mentioning. But there we have it, everything about the Kanto Power Plant. It's certainly not a centerpiece area or anything. In fact, it's entirely optional to ever go there in any game, but I think that's what's intriguing about it. If you just happened upon it without knowing it was there in either red, blue, yellow, fire red, leaf green, or either Let's Go games, it's just a cool little side building full of electric Pokemon, and in some cases, a few poison types. I still say it's done the best in red and blue though, as it does have a slightly unsettling tone to it. I've also said this about Lavender Town and the Pokemon Mansion, so I think you can gauge a guess as to what I find interesting. It's just an abandoned, rundown building off the beaten path. It's filled with electric Pokemon, some pretending to be items in order to attack you, and has the legendary Zapdos at the very end. And to top it all off, there's that one creep standing outside ready to fight you with his gross licky tongue. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's certainly not my favorite place in Kanto, but I still find it pretty interesting. You can find grass and bug Pokemon in forests, water Pokemon in water, fire Pokemon near a volcano, so it just makes sense to have a place to seek out some zappy friends. Other regions have their own power plants as well, of New Mauville and Hoenn, which is pretty similar to Kanto's with electric types and even Voltorb posing as items again. Sinnoh has Valley Windworks as a wind-powered power plant where you can find a few electric types depending on your version of Pachirisu, Shinx, Electrike, Elekid, and Mareep. The Kalos power plant is a power plant that generates solar power from space, but there are no wild Pokemon. Alola has the geothermal power plant located in Blush Mountain, where you can find some electric types nearby of Elekid, Charjabug, Togedemaru, and Alolan Geodude. And in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you can also find Alolan Graveler and Dedenne. You can find a power plant in the Mystery Dungeon games and even Pokemon Conquest, and Learn with Pokemon Typing Adventure. Oh yes, we're pulling some deep cuts now. So thank you all once again for going on another tour guide-like journey with me. I really do enjoy learning about all these places, but I'll probably only continue making these if an area really stands out to me to talk about. I don't plan on doing a designated episode for every area in Kanto, but who knows. I'll keep putting some thought into it. So I'll see you all in the next one. Paraspectre will return.